Naya Voss pressed her palm against the cold viewport, watching the endless dance of distant stars through the reinforced glass. The communications array of Station Whisper stretched into the cosmic darkness like skeletal fingers, its sensors, perpetually listening to the void's secrets. 3 years she'd been here. 3 years of monitoring subspace channels and routing messages between the scattered colonies of the Outer Rim. 3 years of other people's conversations, other people's lives, other people's love. The station hummed around her with the familiar rhythm of recycled air in spinning gravity rings. Somewhere in the residential sectors, the skeleton crew of 12 others lived their lives. But here in the communications hub, Naya existed in splendid isolation. The soft blue glow of her console cast shifting shadows across her pale features. As transmission after transmission scrolled past her screens, trade negotiations between the Kepler colonies, supply requests from mining platforms, military dispatches encrypted beyond her clearance level. And then, cutting through the digital noise like a blade through silk, came something different. Testing, testing. Is this thing even working? The voice was male, rough with exhaustion, but tinged with something that Naya's breath catch. Loneliness. Raw, aching loneliness that matched her own so perfectly, it felt like looking into a mirror. I don't even know why I'm doing this. The chances of anyone hearing this on a private band are practically zero, but Naya's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Protocol dictated she should log the transmission, tag it as misdirected, and forward it to the appropriate channels. Instead, she found herself leaning closer to the speaker, adjusting the gain to filter out the static. I guess I just needed to say it out loud, the voice continued. To tell someone, even if that someone is just empty space. Her name was Lila, and she died 6 months ago in the collapse on Titan Base. We were supposed to be married next month. Had the whole thing planned, small ceremony on New Geneva, her favorite flowers, that ridiculous cake she picked out with 17 different layers. The man's laugh was broken, a sound Naya felt in her chest. I keep thinking about that. Cake. How stupid is that? Lila's gone, and I'm obsessing over frosting and fondant. But she spent 3 hours showing me pictures of it, explaining why each layer mattered, and I pretended to care because watching her eyes light up was worth any amount of wedding planning torture. Naya realized she was crying only when a tear splashed onto her console. She quickly wiped it away, but kept listening. This wasn't meant for her. This private moment of grief belonged to a stranger whose pain echoed across space, but she couldn't bring herself to cut the connection. I'm on a supply run to the Vega settlements now, he continued. My ship's called the Storm Chaser, which Lila always said was a pretentious name. She wanted me to rename it something practical, like Cargo Hauler 7 or Big Metal Thing. God, I miss her terrible sense of humor. Naya checked her screen. A transmission was coming from a standard freight corridor, about 2 days out from her position. She could trace the ship's registration if she wanted to, but that would cross a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. I know you're not there, Lila, the voice said, softer now. But if somehow, somewhere in all this darkness, you can hear me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I wasn't there when the ceiling came down. I'm sorry I can't figure out how to keep going without you. The transmission crackled with interference, and for a moment, Naya thought she'd lost it. Then it came back, stronger. The worst part is how quiet everything is now. We used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. She'd tell me about the books she was reading, the new hydroponic techniques she was developing, her theories about why the coffee synthesizer on level 7 always tasted like burnt plastic. I used to think she talked too much, that I needed more quiet time. What I wouldn't give for just 5 more minutes of her voice, filling up all the empty spaces. Naya's workstation chimed softly, indicating another priority transmission coming. In. She ignored it, her attention completely focused on this stranger's words. In her 3 years on Station Whisper, she'd intercepted thousands of communications. Ship-to-ship chatter, colony updates, personal messages between families scattered across the galaxy. But none had ever affected her like this. "I should probably sign off," he said. "Fuel costs money, and I've got cargo to deliver." But it felt good to talk to someone, even if that someone is just the void between stars. "Maybe I'll try this again sometime. Maybe it'll get easier." There was a long pause, filled only with the subtle hiss of subspace static. "This is Cale Thorne aboard the Storm Chaser, broadcasting on private frequency 7.4.2. If anyone's out there listening, thanks for keeping me company in the dark." The transmission ended with a soft click, leaving Naya alone with the gentle hum of her equipment and the weight of a stranger's grief. She stared at her console for a long time, watching the routine. Transmissions continued to scroll past. Trade reports, navigation updates, weather warnings for the asteroid mining platforms. None of it seemed important anymore. Her fingers moved almost without conscious thought, switching to the private band he'd used. The protocol breach warnings flashed red on her screen, but she dismissed them. Some things were more important than protocol. "This is Station Whisper. To to the Storm Chaser," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Naya. I heard your message, and I just wanted you to know you're not alone out there." She released the transmit button and immediately wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. He hadn't been looking for a response. His message had been meant for the void, for his lost love, for anyone but a lonely communications officer whose only companion was the distant stars. But now it was done. The words sent spinning through space at the speed of light, carrying her own loneliness toward his. The minutes ticked by with no response, and Naya began to think he'd moved out of range or simply chosen not to reply. She returned to her routine duties, logging transmissions and monitoring the communication channels. But part of her attention remained fixed on frequency 7.42. Just as she was about to give up hope, her console chimed. "Station Whisper. This is Cale Thorne. I wasn't expecting anyone to answer." His voice carried a different quality now. Surprise, maybe even a hint of warmth. "Thank you. That's the first time someone said my name in weeks who wasn't trying to sell me fuel or cargo space." Naya's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm sorry for eavesdropping. I should have logged your transmission and moved on, but..." She paused, unsure how to explain the connection she'd felt to a complete stranger's pain. "Sometimes the void gets pretty lonely." "Tell me about it," Cale replied. "What's it like on Station Whisper? Are you the only one monitoring communications?" "There are 12 of us total on the station, but I'm the only one in the commub. It's single quotes S. quiet. A lot like your ship, I imagine, except I don't go anywhere. Just listen to other people's conversations and watch the stars turn." That sounds both peaceful and incredibly isolating. It is. Naya found herself smiling for the first time in months. "What about you? How long have you been running cargo?" "About 8 years now. Started with a beat-up hauler that barely held atmosphere. Worked my way up to the Storm Chaser. She's not much to look at, but she's reliable. Lila always said she looked like a flying brick with delusions of grandeur." There was pain in his voice when he mentioned her name, but also something else. A willingness to share the memory, to let someone else glimpse the woman he'd loved. Naya felt honored by the trust, however small. She sounds like she had a good sense of humor. The best. She could find something funny in any situation, even when the recycling systems broke down. On Titan Base, and we were knee-deep in, well, let's just say it wasn't pleasant. She made jokes until the repair crews arrived, kept everyone's spirits up. That's who she was, the person who made things better just by being there. They talked for another hour, their words bridging the empty space between ship and station. Cale told her about the places he'd been, the strange cargo he'd carried, the beauty of nebulae seen from a pilot's seat. Naya shared stories from the communication hub, fragments of other lives that passed through her equipment, the way the stars looked different from a stationary platform than from a moving ship. When he finally signed off to make a course correction, Naya felt the familiar weight of solitude settle around her shoulders again. But it was different now, not the crushing isolation she'd grown accustomed to, but something lighter. The knowledge that somewhere in the vast darkness, another lonely soul was thinking of her. She looked out at the stars with new eyes, wondering which point of light might be his ship, carrying him toward destinations unknown while carrying her voice in his memory. For the first time in 3 years, Station Whisper felt a little less like a prison and a little more like a lighthouse, its signals reaching across the void to guide lost souls towards something that might, against all odds, be called hope. Cale Thorne's hands trembled as he gripped the control yoke of the storm chaser, staring at the readings that made no sense. According to his instruments, the distress beacon he'd been tracking for 3 days was coming from a ship that had supposedly been destroyed 5 years ago. The registration matched his sister Vera's personal transport, the one she'd been piloting when she vanished during a routine supply run to the outer colonies. The beacon pulsed weakly on his scanner, its signal barely distinguishable from background radiation. He'd almost missed it entirely, might have passed right by if he hadn't been listening to Naya's voice on the private frequency they'd claimed as their own. Her story about intercepting mysterious transmissions had made him more attentive to the strange signals that drifted through space like ghosts. "This is insane," he muttered, adjusting course toward the beacon's source. 5 years, Vera. Where the hell have you been?" He'd been talking to Naya for 2 weeks now, their conversations becoming the highlight of his otherwise solitary runs. She had a way of listening that made him feel heard, really heard, for the first time since Lila's death. When she laughed at his stories or shared her own observations about the cosmos, something inside his chest loosened, like a knot he'd forgotten. Was there slowly beginning to untie? The beacon led him to a region of space he'd never seen on any star chart, a graveyard of derelict ships orbiting a dark planetoid. Ancient hulks drifted in the gravitational embrace of the dead world, their hull plating scarred by micrometeorites and solar radiation. Some looked like they'd been here for decades, maybe longer. Others appeared more recent, their emergency. Lights still blinking weakly in the darkness. And there, nestled among the larger wrecks like a child hiding among adults, was the Nightingale, Vera's ship, Cale's breath caught in his throat. The transport looked intact, its hull showing signs of damage, but nothing catastrophic. No breach that would have killed everyone aboard instantly. Which meant, "Vera," he whispered, his voice cracking on her name. "Please be alive. Please." He brought the storm chaser alongside the Nightingale, using magnetic clamps to lock the ships together. The airlock cycled with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and he stepped aboard his sister's ship with his heart hammering against his ribs. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow. The corridor walls were scored with what looked like claw marks, deep gouges that spoke of a desperate struggle. Cale drew his sidearm, though he wasn't sure what good it would do against whatever had made those marks. "Vera?" he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "It's Cale. If you're here, if you can hear me, ... A sound from deeper in the ship stopped him cold. Not quite human, not quite machine. A rhythmic tapping, like fingers, drumming against metal. Or claws. He moved toward the sound, his weapon raised, each step careful and deliberate. The Nightingale's layout was similar to the storm chaser. He knew where he was going, even in the dim light. The tapping grew louder. As he approached the bridge, the door was sealed, its locking mechanism showing red. Someone had barricaded themselves inside. Cale found the manual override and cranked it slowly, the heavy door sliding open with a grinding protest. What he found inside made him lower his weapon in shock. Vera sat in the pilot's chair, her back to him, fingers tapping an irregular pattern against the armrest. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, one clawed hand resting gently on her shoulder, was something that definitely wasn't human. The creature was tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that seemed to shift between deep purple and black like oil on water. Its face was angular, almost crystalline, with large eyes that held an intelligence both alien and achingly familiar. When it saw Cale, it didn't attack or threaten. Instead, it stepped protectively in front of Vera, who finally turned in her chair. "Hello, little brother," she said, and her smile was the same one he remembered from childhood. "I was wondering when you'd find us." Cale stared at his sister, taking in the changes 5 years had wrought. She was thinner, her hair longer, and streaked with premature silver, but her eyes still held that spark of curiosity that had driven her to explore the far reaches of space, seeking adventure in the unknown. "Vera, who is that?" He gestured at the alien, who watched him with those strange, beautiful eyes. "This is Thane," she said, reaching up to take the creature's hand. The gesture was intimate, protective. "He saved my life when my ship was damaged in the ion storm. His people have been hiding here for generations, protecting this place from scavengers and worse things." Thane spoke then, his voice a harmonious blend of tones that somehow formed words Cale could understand. "Your sister speaks of you often. The one who mourns his beloved, who finds comfort in the voice of the distant star tender." Cale's eyes widened. "How do you know about Naya?" Vera smiled. "We've been monitoring communications traffic, trying to stay informed about the outside world. When we heard you talking to someone on the private frequencies, I made Thane listen in. I wanted to know if my little brother was finally healing." "You've been listening to my conversations?" Heat flooded Cale's face. Some of the things he'd said to Naya were deeply personal, intimate in a way he'd never shared with anyone, not even Lila. "Only enough to know that you're not the broken man who left New Geneva after the funeral," Vera said gently. "This woman, she's good for you. I can hear it in your voice when you talk to her." Thane moved closer, his strange eyes studying Cale with what seemed like compassion. "Love is rare in the darkness between worlds. When it appears, it should be cherished, protected. Your sister has taught me this." The pieces clicked together in Cale's mind. "You two are together?" Vera's smile was radiant. 5 years ago, I crashed here expecting to die. Instead, I found him. Found his people, who've been watching over this graveyard, making sure the dead stay buried and the living find safe passage. Thane nursed me back to health, taught me his language, his customs, and somewhere along the way, we discovered that love transcends species," Thane finished. "Your sister's heart calls to mine across the void between our kinds, just as yours calls to the star tender across the void of space." Cale holstered his weapon, feeling foolish for ever drawing it. "Why didn't you come home?" "I've been searching for you for 5 years. Mom and Dad think you're dead." Vera's expression grew sad. "Because I couldn't leave him, and he couldn't leave his people. They're the last of their kind, Cale. The guardians of this place, sworn to protect the secrets. Buried here, if I returned to human space, I'd have to lie about everything I'd seen, everyone I'd met. I couldn't bear that. But now I'm here," Cale said. "I know the truth. Maybe we can find a way." "Perhaps," Thane said. "But first, you must decide what is most important to you." The woman who tends the distant stars speaks to your heart. Will you answer her call? Kale thought about Naya, alone on her station, waiting for his voice to break the silence of her isolation. They talked about meeting in person someday when his cargo runs brought him closer to her sector. But that was weeks away, maybe months. We've never met face to face, he admitted. We're just voices to each other. Sometimes voices carry more truth than faces, Vera said. When you can't see someone's appearance or judge them by their species or their scars, you hear their soul instead. I fell in love with Thane's voice before I ever understood what he looked like. Thane nodded. The Star Tender's voice carries loneliness that matches yours, but also strength, compassion. She would risk protocol to comfort a stranger's pain. Such hearts are precious beyond measure. Kale looked around the bridge of his sister's ship, taking in the alien technology that had been integrated with human systems. Evidence of two cultures learning to coexist, to complement each other's strengths. What are you suggesting? That perhaps it's time for both of us to take a leap of faith, Vera said. I've been thinking about reaching out to the colonies, establishing contact between Thane's people and humanity. But that's a conversation that needs to happen face to face, with trust and understanding on both sides. And I need to decide if I'm brave enough to risk everything for a voice in the darkness. Kale said. Thane moved to a console and activated a star chart, highlighting a route through space. Station Whisper lies along this path. If you were to take your sister and me to meet with the colonial authorities, we would pass very close to the Star Tender's home. Kale stared at the route, his heart pounding with possibility and terror in equal measure. Everything was changing so fast. This morning, he'd been a cargo pilot carrying goods between lonely outposts. Now he was contemplating first contact between species, reunion with his lost sister, and a face-to-face meeting with a woman he was rapidly falling in love with. It's a lot to process, he said finally. Vera stood and crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. I know it is. But Kale, when did we ever choose the safe path? Remember when we used to sneak out at night to watch the ships launch from the spaceport? You always said you'd rather crash and burn reaching for the stars than spend your life safely on the ground. That was before Lila died, he said quietly. Before I learned how much losing someone can hurt. And now you have a chance to find someone, Thane said gently. The question is, are you brave enough to let yourself be found in return? Kale closed his eyes, thinking of Naya's laugh echoing through the cum system, the way she listened to his stories with such attention, the warmth in her voice when she said his name. Somewhere out there, she was sitting at her console, monitoring the void for his signal. Maybe it was time to give her more than just his voice. All right, he said, opening his eyes and looking at his sister and her unlikely love. Let's go meet some people. Zara Chun wiped grease from her hands with a rag that had seen better decades, staring at the diagnostic readout that confirmed her worst fears. The primary fusion reactor on Station Whisper was failing, its containment field fluctuating in ways that made her stomach clench with anxiety. She had maybe 3 days before the whole thing went critical, and the nearest repair ship was 2 weeks away. Perfect timing, she muttered, crawling back into the maintenance shaft that led to the reactor core. The station groaned around her, its superstructure responding to the gravitational stress of the rotating sections. She'd been the chief engineer here for 18 months, ever since the previous engineer had requested a transfer to somewhere less isolated and depressing. Zara had volunteered for the posting specifically because of its isolation. Fewer people meant fewer questions about her past. The cum system crackled to life as she worked, carrying the familiar voice of Naya from the communications hub. Engineering were getting some unusual readings from the outer sensor array. Are you running any diagnostics? Zara paused in her work, considering her response. She'd grown fond of Naya over the months, appreciating the other woman's quiet competence and gentle humor. They were probably the two youngest people on the station, both hiding from something in their pasts, both finding solace in their technical work. Negative on diagnostics, Zara replied, checking her instruments. What kind of readings? Multiple ships approaching. 3 vessels, running dark until a few minutes ago. They just lit up their transponders. 1 cargo hauler and 2 smaller. Craft, the haulers requesting permission to dock. Zara's blood turned to ice. 3 ships arriving together, requesting docking permission at a communications relay station that rarely saw visitors. It sounded like a raid, the kind the consortium used to flush out fugitives hiding in remote postings. She'd been running from them for 2 years, ever since she'd discovered what they were really using her engineering expertise for. Zara, you still there? Naya's voice carried a note of concern. Yeah, I'm here. Patch me through to the approaching vessels. If this was what she thought it was, she needed to know now. Station whisper. This is Cale Thorne aboard the cargo vessel Stormchaser. Requesting emergency docking. We have a diplomatic situation that requires immediate communication. Relay to colonial authorities. The voice was unfamiliar, but something in its tone made Zara pause. He sounded nervous, excited, but not threatening. Not like consortium enforcers. Stormchaser, this is station engineering. What's the nature of your diplomatic situation? There was a pause before the response came. It single quotes S. Complicated. I have my sister aboard, who's been missing for 5 years, and she's accompanied by a representative of a previously unknown species. We need to establish formal first contact protocols. Zara blinked at the comm panel. First contact? Either this pilot was delusional, or the universe had just gotten a lot more interesting. Stand by, Stormchaser. She switched to internal comms. Naya, are you listening to this? Every word, I think. I think this might be the pilot I've been talking to on the private channels. Cale Thorne, cargo runner. But he never mentioned anything about aliens or missing sisters. People tend to leave out the dramatic parts in casual conversation, Zara said dryly. What's your read on the situation? He sounds genuine and scared. Whatever's happening, I don't think he's trying to deceive us. The reactor alarm chose that moment to sound, a shrill warning that made Zara's heart skip. The containment field was deteriorating faster than her. Calculations had predicted. She had hours, not days. Naya, we've got bigger problems. The fusion reactor is going critical. I need to start emergency shutdown procedures, but that means we'll lose main power within the hour. What? Zara, there are over 300 people in cryosleep in the research section. If we lose power... Zara closed her eyes, the weight of responsibility crushing down on her shoulders. She'd known about the sleepers, scientists and colonists being transported to the outer rim, stored in suspended animation for the long journey. Without power, their life support would fail within hours. I know. I'm working on it. She switched back to external comms. Stormchaser, what kind of technical capabilities do you have aboard your vessels? Standard cargo hauler equipment. Why? We're having a reactor emergency. I don't suppose you have any fusion engineers aboard? Another pause. Actually, we might. One of our companions has extensive knowledge of power generation systems. Different technology base, but the principles are similar. Zara felt a flicker of hope. How different? A new voice came through the comm, speaking accented but clear English. This is Thane aboard the escort vessel. I have experience with quantum fusion matrices. If your reactor uses standard human containment protocols, I may be able to assist. An alien. They actually had an alien aboard, and he was offering to help with their reactor. Zara had seen enough impossible things in her life to roll with the punches. Thane, I'm transmitting our reactor specifications now. How quickly can you get aboard? We are requesting immediate docking clearance. Zara looked at the deteriorating readings on her screen and made a decision that would change everything. Docking Bay 2 is clear. Come alongside and we'll cycle. You through? And Thane? Hurry. 20 minutes later, Zara found herself face to face with 3 people who would have been impossible an hour ago. Cale Thorne was exactly what she'd pictured from Naya's descriptions. Weathered, competent, with eyes that had seen too much loss. His sister Vera was smaller, with an intensity that reminded Zara of herself. And Thane ... Thane defied every expectation she'd had about what an alien might look like. Tall, elegant, with skin that shifted between deep purple and black like liquid starlight. His eyes held an ancient wisdom, but also a warmth that put her immediately at ease. The reactor core is this way, she said, leading them through the maintenance corridors. We've got maybe 2 hours before containment failure, and 300 people depending on us not letting that happen. 300? Vera asked. I thought this was just a communications relay. It is, but we're also a way station for deep space colonists. Most of our passengers are in cryo-sleep, headed for settlements in the Perseus Arm. Zara ducked under a low-hanging pipe. If we lose power, they die. Thane moved with fluid grace through the cramped corridors, his large frame somehow never catching on the obstacles that snagged the humans. Your reactor design is similar to those used by my people, but more primitive. The containment matrix relies on magnetic field generation rather than quantum resonance. Can you fix it? Zara asked. Perhaps. But I will need your expertise to interface with systems I do not fully understand. They reached the reactor chamber, where the massive fusion core hummed with barely contained stellar fire. Warning lights bathed everything in hellish red, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with dangerous energy. Zara pulled up the diagnostic interface, showing Thane the cascading failures that were driving the reactor toward meltdown. The magnetic coils are losing coherence. I've tried rerouting power, adjusting the field geometry, but nothing's working. Thane studied the readings with those alien eyes, his expression thoughtful. The problem is not with individual components, but with the harmonic resonance of the entire system. The magnetic fields are fighting each other rather than working in concert. Like instruments in an orchestra playing different songs, Vera sighed precisely. Thane moved to the manual control interface. But if we can retune the frequency generators to create constructive interference patterns, we might be able to stabilize the containment field, Zara finished, understanding flooding through her. But the calculations would be incredibly complex. We'd need to adjust hundreds of variables simultaneously. Not we, Thane said gently. My people see mathematical relationships differently than yours. What seems complex to you appears as elegant patterns to me. He placed his hands on the control interface, his skin seeming to merge with the metal in a way that should have been impossible. Lines of light traced across his forearms like circuit pathways, and suddenly the reactor's chaotic harmonics began to settle into something approaching order. How are you doing that? Zara breathed. My species evolved a symbiotic relationship with our technology, Thane explained, his voice strained with concentration. We do not simply operate our machines, we commune with them, become part of them. Your reactor is not so different from our own designs. It simply needed someone to listen to what it was trying to say. The warning alarms gradually fell. Silent as the containment field stabilized, the angry red lights shifted to steady amber, then finally to the calm blue of normal operation. Zara stared at the readings in amazement. You did it. You actually did it. She turned to look at Thane. With new respect, thank you. You saved 300 lives today. We saved them, he corrected. I could not have done this without your knowledge of human engineering principles. Kale's voice crackled through the comm system. Engineering team, report. We're showing all green on the bridge monitors. All systems stable, Zara replied. Crisis averted, thanks to our new friend. Roger that. Naya wants to see you all in the communications hub. Something about establishing contact with colonial authorities. As they made their way through the station's corridors, Vera fell into step beside Zara. You're running from something, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Zara glanced at the other woman, seeing a recognition in her eyes that spoke of shared experience. What gave me away? The way you volunteer for isolated postings. The careful way you spoke to Thane, like you're used to dealing with dangerous secrets. The fact that you knew exactly how to handle a first contact situation without panicking. Vera smiled. It takes one to know one. And what are you running from? The assumption that love has to look a certain way, fit into certain categories. Vera's gaze drifted to Thane, walking ahead of them with his alien grace. Sometimes the heart wants what the heart wants, regardless of what society thinks is possible. They reached the communications hub to find Naya bent over her console, her face animated with excitement as she coordinated with colonial authorities. When she looked up and saw Kale standing there in person, her expression transformed into something radiant. You're real, she said, rising from her chair. So are you, he replied, and the space between them seemed to crackle with the same energy that had once threatened to destroy the reactor. Zara watched them move toward each other like opposing magnetic fields, suddenly finding perfect alignment, and felt something shift inside her own chest. For 2 years, she'd been hiding, running, afraid to trust anyone with the truth about her past. But here were 4 people who just risked everything on trust. Trust in strangers, in aliens, in the possibility that love could bridge any distance. Zara, Thane said softly, appearing beside her. You have been alone for a long time. She looked up at him, startled by the compassion in those alien features. How can you tell? Because I recognize the loneliness. I spent decades believing I was the last of my kind before Vera showed me that family can be chosen, not just inherited. He gestured toward the others. Perhaps it is time for all of us to stop running from our pasts and start building our futures. As if in response to his words, Naya's console chimed with an incoming priority transmission. She glanced at the others and activated the speaker. Station whisper, this is Colonial Ship New Horizon. We've received your first contact report and are adjusting course to rendezvous with your position. Estimated arrival, 14 hours. Please maintain all parties aboard until we can establish proper diplomatic protocols. Acknowledged, New Horizon. Naya replied. She turned to look at the group gathered in her communications hub, human and alien, engineer and pilot, lovers separated by distance and species, but united by hope. Looks like we've got some time to kill, she said. Zara smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I know where they keep the good coffee, and I think we all have some stories to tell. As they settled in to wait for the colonial ship's arrival, Zara realized that sometimes the best discoveries weren't planned. Sometimes they happened when reactor cores threatened to explode, when aliens offered to help, when people stopped, running long enough to let themselves be found out, and sometimes, in the vast loneliness of space, you discovered that the most important thing wasn't where you were going, but who you chose to travel with along the way.